Hey guys, Igor here. In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to draw scales, and you can apply these to all sorts of different animals like lions, alligators, basically any reptiles. So let's get straight into it. The first thing that I want to do is lower the tone of the overall paper to that middle grayscale point. And then on a new layer, you can basically just start with the sketch. So let's say our scales will be diamond shaped. So we have these type of scales. Let's also do some round scales. Okay, and after you have your initial sketch, you're going to want to create a new layer, hold it, drag it, drop it, and this is going to be the color fill. So what you're going to want to do is grab a darker color, and this is going to be mainly the shadows. So we select a darker gray, and now you go along. I chose to go along the bottom right sides because the light direction is going to be on the top left, and you'll see me add the arrow in. So here we go, just darkening the bottom right and a little bit of the bottom left. Basically the cracks between the scale, because my scales, the way that I'm drawing them is they're side by side, they're not overlapping. Now you can grab a slightly lighter color than the midtone, which is our background color, and you go in on the opposite side of that, and you can drop in the highlights. So how do you go about rendering this? Well, first of all, you can now disable the line art layer, and with what you have left, to further kind of render it all out, you can grab slightly, you want to basically vary the contrast, so you can use slightly darker colors in some of the areas where you think less light would be. Alright, now we're going to go in and we're going to add some indents, some scratches, basically rough up the scales so that they don't look like tiles. And to do this, I'm going to use a gray color, something that's just a little bit darker than the midtone. Let's talk a little bit about lighting the imperfections. And they work in the same way that you would normally try to light the scale. You have the direction of light, and the surfaces that face that direction are going to be lighter, and everything that faces away is darker. That's the easiest way to kind of break it down. Another easy way to think about it is, if it's an indent, the darker side will be facing the light source, and the highlight will be on the opposite side. And if it pops out, like it's a little bump, then the side that is being lit is already facing directly on the light source, and then the opposite side of that would be the shadow. So I'm gonna now speed this up, and we can talk a little bit about the outcome when I get there, so you guys don't have to watch everything slowly coming together. Okay, let's say this is enough for now. Basically, I don't want to go through all the scales just because for the sake of the amount of time it's going to take. since this isn't really going to be a piece. Let's move on to the circular scales, but before I do, I'm just going to quickly mention, alright, you guys see how most of this has to do with playing around with lighting, you know, the pushing the amount of highlights like to a even higher or an even lighter tone really started to give it like a wet, shiny look. You know, you can keep the matte by kind of not going so high on the scale. But you know, to note a couple things, I guess this part right here was a little bit weird to paint, but you know, it still turned out fine. On a full scale dragon, you wouldn't really notice a small detail like that. I mean, it would still add to the scene. It wouldn't take away from it. So we're gonna do a similar thing. We're gonna pop up our underlining sketch, and for those, let me quickly disable this. For those people that are like, okay, so now I drew the scales, but I have this ugly empty spot if I disable the background. Well, all you gotta do is color pick the color, and then create another layer underneath. Go underneath, you know, and then color it all in. So if you disable the background, you can see that because I color picked the background color, I can just draw it in like that. Obviously, you could begin the scales already having this base color, but again, for the sake of the demonstration, I just wanted to show you guys that it's all about highlights and shadows to make the scales look the way they do. So creating a new layer and enabling our sketch layer, I'm going to do the same thing for the circular scales, but we can also, the way that we can do this one is we can start with a darker color for the base, and I'm just going to color in this patch right here, and then I will draw the scales within this patch. And I'm going to speed this up as well, and I'm going to slow it down once I'm done, and we can talk about it a little bit, and then I'll show you guys one more example or two examples of some finished pieces where I applied this exact technique. So here we go. Okay, this is the second example. Looks a lot like rocks, but I think that's kind of the point. At least when I try to draw my dragons, I tend to focus on a more organic, realistic looking thing. So some of the pointers that I wanted to give was, you saw how I started with a darker base. This kind of lets you build up the shape right on top of it. So I didn't even really need the line art because it was a random design and I already kind of had it in my head. So technically I would advise that you even skip that layer. And obviously I could have kept rendering. You could see some really rough strokes on some of these, but again, that's not the point. It's just to kind of help you understand that it's all about having the directional light, putting the light source, the surfaces that face directly towards that light, you know, hit them with that lighter color, and then all the indents and everything that's facing away from it would probably be darker. So one of the things that I would do is I would probably pick up this darker gray color and go along the bottom surfaces of some of these flat gray colors and help kind of push that down more so that it's more beveled. I think that's the word. So these are the two quick examples of how I would draw scales. You know, one is very geometric and the other one's a lot more organic. So let's take a look at some of the other paintings that I've done where I've applied these techniques. So here's an older painting of mine. This was done for, you know, somebody commissioned it and they wanted some giant dragon guarding some treasure. So let's zoom in on the scales and take a quick look at the technique and see if I actually applied it and what I would do differently now. So looking at some of these scales, you see that the color doesn't go that deep. I would probably go back, grab a slightly darker color, and push in the indents on these scales even more. And then I would possibly even grab some of these highlight colors and go along the edge. Let me make sure that this layer, it's under the overlay. Let's just create a new layer. I'm gonna undo all of this anyways. But again, that all depends on whether the lighting works or not. You can kind of see that over here towards the back, the scales get larger and the color technique is still sort of the same. This isn't really a good example because there's not much directional light hitting towards one side, but you kind of see the technique from the eye. And this is an older piece. I'll have a much better example for you of a piece that I spent a really long time on the scales specifically. So this is just just so you can kind of get a feel for me applying this technique into a painting. So yeah, let's take a look at the other piece, which I actually didn't do on the iPad. I did it on the computer. So I'm gonna switch over the screen and let's talk about it. Alright, so here is the dragon painting that I was talking about. Let's take a zoom in and admire these scales. I took a really long time on them, but I'm absolutely floored with the results. I love, love, love how it turned out. And I actually used a similar technique for the horns. You see that the indents are highlight, or the parts that are sticking out more are highlighted, and to show recession, you use a darker color. I think that's actually one of my favorite parts about the piece is, in fact, the horn. Along the leg, you have a similar looking approach where the scales are, again, darker where there's less light, which would be between the cracks, and then the surface itself is a little bit lighter, and then it has some variation because of the different texture that goes in within that. And you can see the rocks even look similar because, again, that's how I draw stuff from my imagination. Since I wasn't looking at a picture, I kind of had to just wing it. And you can definitely see here within some of these scales, you have all these imperfections, things like this. It's all done in that same style. Anyways, as always, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. If you did, be sure to leave a like. Also, comment section. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'll try to the best of my ability to answer them. And I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Have a good one.